The 10 sonatas for piano and violin by Ludwig van Beethoven will always be an enormous challenge to Lambert Orkes and me, even after having studied them for 20 years and now having had this enormous luxury, in a way, to dedicate an entire year to this body of work. There's still so much to discover, and I can only try every evening to show another aspect of the enormous possibilities and complexity there is in this body of work.
We are in the Hotel Maurice.
Right.
You know where that is? Rue de Rivoli?
Rue de Rivoli.
Yeah?
I'll deal with the luggage.
Ja, das ist jetzt von Paris, damit er einfach auch die Aufnahmedaten hat und das Programm abends und so weiter. Ich habe ihm jetzt eine Seite rausgerissen, die brauche ich auch nicht mehr, aber sie schicken ihn dann halt ins Schedule ohne irgendwelche Zahlen drin.
Ludwig van Beethoven was a key figure in my life very early on. After the debut with Herbert von Karajan in 1977, it was him who suggested that I should study the violin concerto within a period of 3 months and then come back to him and audition it to him. I did that, and after the beginning bars of the violin solo, into about 10 or 12 bars, he said, "Thank you, that's enough. Come back next year." That was the first musical defeat of my life. I learned to study, first of all, the score very carefully, not only the violin voice. Secondly, I learned much about the complexity in Beethoven's writing. This is especially true for the violin concerto, which is written in such an interwoven way between the orchestra and the violin that it is tremendously important to know each other's importance at any second of the piece. My 1 year study was at last fruitful. The recording with Herbert von Karajan took place in Berlin, as many of all the other recordings as well, done in one session, which comes close to a live recording. Though we kind of regretted this early recording later on, because after having played it together for at least 20 times, we both realized how much more under the skin we came with every performance. And especially with me getting more mature and also playing other repertoire, it was apparent that the first recording I did of the Beethoven Violin Concerto is, as many other recordings out of that very early age, like looking at a snapshot in my family album. It has nothing to do with what I would do today. In my early teens, I also started to study the sonatas. And beginning with the Spring Sonata, which seemed to be the most approachable of them all, written in a very sunny mood, though by that time I did not know from which descendants Spring came from. Now, as I have gone through the cycle many, many times in my life, I realize that once again Spring is coming out from darkness to light, one of the light motifs in Beethoven's life.
La sonorité du temps de Beethoven était différente parce que les instruments étaient montés d'une façon différente.
The tone was different in Beethoven's time because the instruments were made differently.
Et le la et le ré étaient en boyau.
There was less tension. The strings, especially mi, la, and re, were made of catgut, so the tone was more intimate. The angle of the neck meant there was less tension in the instrument.
On a changé à partir du 1800.
The shape of the neck changed in 1800. This was, of course, as a result of new strings being developed that were better suited to the instrument.
Plus adaptées, plus souples et en même temps plus résistantes.
They were more supple and at the same time more resistant, which gave a new vitality to the tone. Some people dislike it. They say they prefer Baroque instruments. But I think that if Stradivarius were to come back today, he would be delighted to see that we are now able to obtain the very quintessence of his instrument, his instruments. And I think that is true of Anne-Sophie Mutter's violin.
I vividly remember that I wanted to have violin lessons for my 5th birthday. I don't think that my parents took this wish very serious. It took quite a while to convince them, and with 5.5 I started to play piano at first, and very soon after that with violin lessons. At the age of 6 I won my first competition, also in piano for hands as well as in violin, and a few years later I did the same competition again. And that time it was particularly difficult for me because my first teacher, a pupil of Carl Flesch, had died, and I had to go through these 9 months competition period without a teacher. I won also that second competition, and after that the most difficult moment in my life came when I had to find a violinist who would teach me. I went to Henrik Schering, who up to this day is probably the most famous pupil of Carl Flesch. And Schering suggested that I should go to Aida Stucki, who then became the most important teacher I ever had. Not only a fantastic violinist, but a very wise pedagogue, a woman which I highly admired, and a woman who started to study repertoire which I hadn't done until then, started to study Mozart with me, and also then later started to study Beethoven. One key moment came in the year 76 when I did an internationally acclaimed recital at the Luzern Festival. Maestro von Karajan heard about that, and as he was very open towards young musicians, I was one of the many invited to audition. And I was scheduled to play at 9 o'clock in the morning, so I arrived somewhere at 8 in the Philharmonie in the hall. And Karajan started his rehearsal at 9, and I had to wait and wait and wait for quite a number of hours. So after the lunch break, I finally met this great maestro, and I was very taken from the first moment on by the warmth of his personality. He suggested that I play part of the chaconne, which I did with the whole orchestra present in the hall and listening. And after playing the Bach chaconne in the entire length, I also played some movements of a Mozart concerto. And after the audition, Karajan said to me that he would be very happy to play 1977, a concert together with me in Salzburg.
There's no way to be made any better.
Probably the best. No.
It's been sometimes asked of us how we go about developing our partnership, how we learn a particular piece of music. and it's a multi-layered answer. There are pieces of music which she has done from her childhood, which I know not so well, and I will tend to listen carefully to her experience. Conversely, there are other pieces of music which I've had some intense experience and perhaps she has had less exposure to, and so I come with my particular set of experiences. I think what is most interesting for us is when we approach a work that neither of us know or have, so we say, performed in depth. A pianist is always going to have a different point of view than a violinist. The piano is a multi-layered instrument with many voices. The violin has essentially a melody line, but in the case of Beethoven sonatas, oftentimes is partaking in a dialogue, and as in any dialogue, sometimes what may seem to be the lead instrument is actually supporting the other instrument. So it becomes a question in our rehearsal of identifying each other's role.
There's actually very little exposure there other than we exchange musical phrases, and the piano is definitively the leading part. Though there is in the second movement already the development of variation technique, and amazingly enough the violin already has, he already tries to break the traditional form of the sonata, and he already gives an own variation to the violin. Going to play yours first and then mine?
Sure.
Yeah? Variation 1. I always like coming back to Beethoven's birthhouse in Bonn. It is here where I can study some of his autographs of the sonatas, where I can look into his correspondence and other documents of his time. And it deepens my understanding of this great composer. And up to this day, you feel the spirit of the man who was born in a tiny little room in this place in Bonn. You see a painting which shows Franz Anton Ries, the violin teacher of Ludwig van Beethoven, who for many years, starting in his youth, tried to be a good violinist, but never overcame the technical problems connected with this instrument. The other person painted here is Johann Peter Salomon, a very important impresario in the life of Joseph Haydn. He brought Joseph Haydn to London, Haydn, who was composition teacher of Ludwig van Beethoven, had a tremendous influence in his style of writing, and for many, many years stayed not only his teacher but his mentor. And if you look at the early sonatas, opus 12, you clearly see the enormous influence Haydn had on the style of these pieces. I think that Beethoven would have written many more pieces for violin, but in his case it needed always the input of others. It needed the input of Rode, it needed the input of Franz Clement to compose the violin concerto.
Le violon, le Sir Lord Raven d'Anne-Sophie Mutter est un instrument merveilleux.
Anne-Sophie Mutter's violin is a wonderful instrument, made in 1710. She used to have a violin that was a little more supple, a little more delicate. But this instrument is ideal for her, for the strength in the fingers of her left hand, her insistence on tone, the power she draws out of the violin.
Elle l'a trouvé dans ce violon de 1710 qui est un violon tout à fait exceptionnel.
This 1710 instrument, which she showed me in an airport in the south of France, is absolutely unique. One day she phoned me saying, "I found a violin and I'd like to have your opinion on it." She was in Nice. I managed to get the airport manager to lend us a little office. She only had an hour between flights. I drove over to inspect the instrument she wanted me to look at. I saw, of course, that it was a magnificent Stradivarius. She played a few notes, and I said to her, "You can go ahead and buy it. I think it's just the instrument for you." It's not just that it is a top-quality Stradivarius. There also has to be a marriage between the violin and the violinist.
For me, interesting is to see the situation in which Beethoven is writing number 4, opus 23, which actually was composed at the same time as he did Spring, which is very typical also for Beethoven, for many other composers as well, but for Beethoven, that he needed these opposed side of darkness and light. It's like when he composed number 5 and 6, the symphonies, also in the same time frame. He seemed to nourish each other's characteristics from that. What I think is amazing about number 4 is the fact that he also uses a lot of Baroque elements, and he seems to be in a state of not knowing where to go.
Opus 23, rather stormy, dark in many ways, though it is offset by a wonderful slow movement that is not exactly slow. Beethoven seems to be wanting a kind of comic style here. My partner and I sometimes disagree about this. She tends to want to see the deeper side of it, and I want to see the more comic side of it. So we've agreed to disagree, and our performances on whatever night might show these differences.
We go to spring now, which is...
Well, this is where the violin...
Where the violin finally, for the first time in the whole cycle, starts the melody.
That's right.
And I think where the violin has finally the same status as the piano. It's the equal partner to the piano. And isn't that also because of the more elaborate and the size of the sound of the keyboard instruments?
Well, that's interesting you say that. This was written, completed in 1801. Beethoven was very much at the heart of driving piano technology. He was always complaining to the manufacturers that they weren't powerful enough.
Was it because of his deafness?
That was part of it.
Yeah.
But it was also the style of his writing. He was known to destroy pianos.
Yeah.
He would play and strings would break. In fact, he would have someone next to him pull the strings out as they broke so they wouldn't interfere with the continuity of the performance. So, yes, now the piano is able to compete a little bit better.
Yep.
And so he's able to risk the violin starting with this beautiful melody. And then we poor pianists who don't have the vibrato and all this kind of ability to slide and make differentiations of intonation, we have to, with great temerity and timidity, try to make our beautiful melody afterwards.
Yeah, that's what
so I sweat a bit here.
Yeah, let's spring now. Scherzo. Actually, this is the sonata with the first scherzo in it. So we have a four movement.
And what is the meaning of scherzo?
Isn't it a dance?
Joke, I think.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's a way of introducing some levity into the proceeding, because he precedes us with something very profound and serious.
But I think you always have to also play it in dance mood, so it's, sure, it has to be witty.
Yes, it has that lightness.
Good, rhythmical
Usually.
feeling.
Of course, Brahms used to do some...
but they are dark ones.
Yeah.
Think about the one in number 10, which is...
Yes, that's getting to be almost
dark.
Brahmsian.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back to spring.
And we actually purposely don't play together on this.
We try not to play together, yes.
If we play together,
sometimes
we're wrong.
It's hard. Here we are looking at the first movement of Beethoven's C minor sonata, opus 30, number 7. It's very apparent how much Beethoven was fighting against the white paper, how difficult it was for him to define his ideas, to finalize them, and various moments he is crossing out, as we can see, and he's changing his mind.
his scribbles. Sometimes you even see parts where he had tried to erase things, maybe by using a knife, I don't know. In any case, this very well mirrors much of the struggle he had during the time where he was already fighting for many years against his more and more apparent deafness, against other health problems he constantly had throughout his life. His liver problems, from which he also then eventually died.
have one bar. We probably can correct this time.
Maybe. Which bar is it?
This F.
Ah. Oh.
This is
well, there are other bars too.
Yeah?
Oh, yes.
Petite vibration. Je suis très attaché à elle et à son violon.
I'm very fond of her and of her violin, because it is important not to destroy what I would call her musical genius.
And the violin was in a superior position to a keyboard instrument before Beethoven.
It's true, yeah.
With the harpsichord. The harpsichord was never a kind of competing.
Yeah.
So when the piano comes on, it's this new instrument, everyone's got to have it, and so you need new
And everybody
software
writes
for it,
for
as
it.
it were, new music,
Yeah.
and so on, everyone's starting to write for it. And since playing music is a collaborative art in those days, and you did it for your fun instead of watching television at night, you sat down and you played with your people. In fact, it was not unusual for noblemen to advertise for manservants who could play violin, so they could play duos together on the piano.
I would have had a great life back then. Altogether, it's quite a journey, you know, through 15 years of his life. And I enjoy it enormously because every time we start at the first program, we have to kind of get back into this very lively, very playful, very charming, gallant mood of these Haydnesque sonatas. And then you have to develop into what is really an enormous concerto, which I love very much, the Kreutzer, because finally I can play out.
Beethoven to Baron Alexander von Wetzlar, dated 18th of May, 1803. Although we have never spoken together, I have no hesitation in recommending the bearer, Herr Brichtauer, to you as a highly skillful virtuoso with complete command of his instrument. Apart from his concertos, he also plays quartets excellently.
The last two sonatas have been written thanks to great violinists. The Kreutzer, thanks to Brichtauer, a violinist who was visiting Vienna, and Beethoven was in a tremendous hurry to finish the piece, and he even once called up Ferdinand Ries in the morning and told him to write out the violin voice, because the copist with whom he usually worked together didn't have time.
Ferdinand Ries on the Kreutzer Sonata. The piano part was written out only here and there. Brichtauer had to play the wonderful theme with variations in F from Beethoven's own manuscript at the Augarten concert, which took place at 8 o'clock in the morning, as there was no time to copy it.
Consider the length of 45 minutes and the, you know, the expertise technically you need in order to perform that, also physically, brings you to the thinking that this is a concerto rather than a sonata.
Well, that's why Beethoven said that, the cover piece, that this was a work for the two instruments in contralto style.
The Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung reviewed the Kreutzer Sonata thus: "One would have to be in the grip of some kind of aesthetic and artistic terrorism, or so won over by Beethoven as to be blind, to fail to find in this work a new, obvious proof of the fact that for some time now this artist has been indulging in caprices, but above all striving merely to be absolutely different from other people."
There's this wonderful story which also shows how temperamental and probably also how romantic Beethoven was as a performer, how much involved he was. When Brichtauer did this little cadenza.
Oh yeah, this, well,
Yeah?
there's a piano cadenza first.
Brichtauer did a little arrangement after that, a little cadenza, right. And then Beethoven jumped
up and, oh, my beloved.
You never do that.
Brichtauer left this account: "When I accompanied him in this sonata concertante, at the repetition of the first part of the presto, I imitated the flight at the 18th bar of the pianoforte of this movement. He jumped up, embraced me, saying, 'Once again, my dear chap.'"
Let's go to the Kreutzer.
And now, finally, the violin really has this kind of virtuoso
And the
role.
violin starts the sonata once again.
Exactly, all by yourself,
Yeah.
without the piano doing anything.
bridge tower visiting Vienna, and Beethoven trying and wanting to present him with a piece, wrote this fantastic virtuosic piece. Then over a fight because of a woman, they broke off their friendship, and Beethoven dedicated the sonata to Kreutzer, Ferdinand Kreutzer, who probably never performed the piece.
Contemporary art, painting as well as sculpting, plays a very important role in my life. Early on, I met Jean Tinguely through Paul Sacher, as he was a regular guest in Paul Sacher's home in Switzerland. And having the chance to visit the atelier and be present at the creative process in which such a sculpture is being built, of course creates enormous excitement, and it also brings back the excitement you might feel when you sit in front of a score. You might be able to relate better to the composer, who once also was in this ecstatic state of creation. And I think you can only recreate if you know what drama comes once you are actually creating a piece. And being a recreative musician, not self-composing, includes a lot of creative elements as well, a lot of fantasy, a lot of time elements. And today I couldn't think of my life not being touched by contemporary art, by painting, by sculpting. I live with it.
She has a technique, knowing no problem. She is a great personality as a musician, as an artist, and she plays all kinds of musical styles in a fascinating way. So I'm sure she will do a lot of help to the development of modern music, because she understands what our now living composer wants to tell the musical world.
Through art, not only through literature, but I think through music the most. I am convinced that music is the bond between earth and heaven. And I'm very convinced that the spirit is going on and that we have the duty to feel our spirit as much as we can during a lifetime on earth. Reading literature about that, of many different writers, is something which gives me a lot of inner strength and something which plays a part of music an important role in my life.
Kreutzer and Rode, another great violinist of the French tradition, were looked upon as being competing artists. Rode was the violinist Beethoven dedicated his last sonata to, already at a stage where Ferdinand Rode had left the highest platform of his virtuosity. The G major, numbers 10, is for me the crown of all the sonatas, because it is a piece where Beethoven overcomes his struggles and finds beauty in accepting destiny and just letting music speak to people.
Sandwich, water, my banana, and now an apple. Even though the work is not obvious in its virtuosic elements, it is perhaps the most difficult of all to play. Beethoven, of course, had been deaf for many years. He could not actually hear what he was doing. Neither did he have the benefit of being able to sit down at the piano and comfortably play through it and be aware of what he was playing. It's pure music. The technical difficulties are left for us to solve and not to share with the listener.
Okay, fine.
Human thing to do.
You want to come on stage, Roberto?
Yeah.
Okay.
Over we go. Come on.
In a letter to the Archduke Rudolf, Beethoven complained at the end of December 1812, "Very early tomorrow morning, the copyist will be able to start on the last piece. As I'm writing several other works at the same time, I've not hurried unduly over the last piece merely for the sake of punctuality, especially as I had to write this with more consideration in view of Roeder's playing. We like to have more tumultuous passages in our finales, but they do not suit R, which embarrassed me somewhat."
House music played a very important role in the life of the aristocracy during Beethoven's lifetime. And some of the pieces, like the early sonatas for piano and violin, have certainly been written out of the purpose to entertain in the evenings instead of leaving the house, going somewhere and watching TV. One did play with another, and the violin played along with it. Archduke Rudolf, who was an enormously important person in Beethoven's life, somebody who inspired Beethoven and was very truthfully on his side, and actually also the only compositorial student Beethoven ever had, did perform the world premiere of the Opus 96, Beethoven's last sonata for piano and violin. Actually, for piano and violin, with Rohde together, and this shows what high level of playing there has been.